Okay. So I'm Leora. I work with the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. So that's those of you in the Pacific Islands and Hawaii and Nevada, California, Arizona. Kelsey and Megan are our colleagues in Northwest with Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Idaho. And together we are doing this series on the Interconnected Systems Framework. And we are offering a series of learning with Susan Barrett, who's doing the overarching systems work, systems framework, and then sessions with University of Southern California on practices. So there's a combo platter. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. If you are with us today, you are here to learn and explore and listen into virtual adaptations of psychological first aid, PFA. I want to, with Pamela Vona, I'll introduce her in a little bit. So we are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, grateful for funding, and also want to say that all the opinions and views and learnings expressed in this session are of ours only. We already disclaimed, so I'm going to move us forward. And I just want to name, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. So we are in a time in this week where there's been lots of geographical knowledge naming. There's a lot of us talking about states and regions in ways in which we may not normally. But one way that we always want to start our learning, no matter what, is by acknowledging the land that some of us come from and some of us occupy and all of us are on. And so I want to acknowledge that the University of Washington is on ancestral land of the coast Salish. And if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but I'm saying it in my own native tongue, you can let me know how to say it in the chat box and I will learn from you and we'll all learn together. And also all the native people of the Northwest region. The Pacific Southwest MHTTC is led by my organization, the Center for Applied Research Solutions. And we're based in LA and in Sacramento and in Santa Rosa, California. And so our offices are on the land of the Nisei-Nan peoples and the Cahuilla bands and also the Tongva peoples. And so we want to acknowledge and have a lot of gratitude. A lot of our work based in school mental health is based on interdependency and on the history of from whom we come so that we can be purposeful for who is coming after us. Speaking of land, again, as I mentioned, we are two centers. If you're not familiar with us as an MHTTC network, welcome, welcome, welcome. There are 10 regional centers and 2 population-focused centers that make up all the centers across the country that provide no-cost mental health and school mental health workforce development. So that's webinars. In the pre-COVID life, it was trainings, technical assistance, products, et cetera, et cetera. So you can contact Kelsey and Megan, or you can contact me and my colleagues at the end if you would like to learn more about what we can do with you and for you. Great. So this series on the Interconnected Systems Framework, also called Coordinated School Service Systems, is a series that is based on last year's body of collaborative work where we created 3 fact sheets. Susan Barrett and her team created 3 fact sheets that you can access and also 3 webinars, both on an introduction to ISF, if that's new to you, what does ISF look like, and how is it different from multi-tiered systems of support? How is it different from just school mental health? That's webinar 2. And then the third is like, what does that actually mean? Okay, so all the talk and the framework, fine, but then now as a leader of a system, district, county, school, state, how do I actually do this work? So we've got 3 fact sheets and 3 webinars that are foundational for your learning. Taking a breath. And that brings us to today. So I want to say with full disclosure, as a teacher educator, that I had really never heard of the term ISF before. I'd heard of the term school mental health and multi-tier systems of support. And so I was also a learner many years ago in understanding the framework and still am a learner with all of you. So if ISF is a new term to you, have no fear. If school mental health or MTSS is a new term to you, also have no fear. We're all bridging learning together. And so one of the pieces that we wanted to offer is that this entire series is thinking about how do you create school mental health and wellness in a systems, strategic, integrated approach. So it's not just one person doing something here. It's not just another division doing something here, but everyone is in communication and integration with one another through systems and data and practices. And so today we're learning about one of those practices. And we asked our colleagues, Susan Barrett and our colleagues at USC, to adapt a lot of their, or teach us and share with us and learn with us of how these practices and systems leadership work has been adapted to virtual times. Because of COVID or because of rural, many of you work in rural communities. So how do you do the both and? So we went through module 1, ISF systems, and last week with, 2 weeks ago, last week with Steve Hayden, a secondary traumatic stress and educator well-being. We wanted to start with systems and with you, wellness for you, well-being for you. And then we moved into how do we do trauma-informed approaches through a systemic and systematic lens. And today, my friends, we are going to be learning with Pamela Vona on virtual adaptations for psychological first aid. This series is all in one link. So all the recordings and all the decks are up in one space. And I do just want to say very clearly that if you would like coaching, so a webinar is not your most amazing modality of learning, please let your regional MHTTC know. So Kelsey and Megan or me and my team, and we're here to help you. So this is part of module 2 on trauma-informed approaches from a systematic framework. Ooh, systems framework. That's hard to say at this point of the day. And psychological first aid, we are naming as a practice to lift up a trauma-informed approach. And Pamela will be telling you more about that. And then you'll hear our next session is on even more detailed on trauma-informed skills for educators and how to adapt them for the virtual context. So we have then module 3 and module 4. You'll see module 3 is based on tiers 2 and tiers 3. So folks who need intensive support and support that's even more specific to a need. And then we'll focus on interconnected systems framework and equity. And so I hope that you join us for that January session stream. And then the last, we'll end this series with a town hall where you can come and ask questions and we can hear all of our presenters all at once, being able to answer and be in conversation. Okay. Great. Okay, last thing before Pamela comes on, which is that if you are new to the interconnected systems framework, and if you're new to that term, the way that I have been taught, the most simple way, and of course, Kelsey and any of you who are more nuanced in this, you can add more to the chat box, is that interconnected systems framework is a blend of school mental health supports through a multi-tiered system of support. So it's both together. SMH and MTSS together equals ISF. And the through line of this work is actually done by teams. So many of you, I just saw the Northern Mariana Islands Project Aware team, you are here with us. So this work happens not just you and one of your colleagues who went to a conference, but your teams, how to do this in teams. And it is focused on outcomes and data systems with a purposeful attention and attunement to equity. And of course, today, practices. So with all that, we're going to move forward so that we can get us started. We can even move one more forward to get us started. And Pamela, I'm going to invite you to come on video and introduce yourself and introduce the session. And I just want to say we are so grateful to be in partnership with the University of Southern California and with the Treatment and Services Adaptation Center for Resilience, Hope, and Wellness in Schools. I am going to hand it to you, Pamela, to get us started. I'm going to go off video and I'm going to remind you if you have questions to please put them in the Q&A box. If you've got resources or ideas or things that Pamela has said that really land for you, please put them in the chat box. And we're just so grateful, Pamela, for you to be here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. I appreciate Kelsey and Leora and Megan for inviting me. And I don't think that there could be a better time to be talking about psychological first aid. 2020 has certainly been a year of uncertainty and stress, and I think we're in the midst of that right now. So I hope that we can all walk away with some additional practices and strategies that not only can support the students with whom we work, but also are strategies that we can be utilizing for ourselves. I am from the Treatment and Services Adaptations Center for Resilience, Hope, and Wellness in Schools. We are also a SAMHSA-funded center, and we've been around for about 20 years. And originally, the work of our center was really focused on developing some of those Tier 2 interventions that really focus specifically on trauma and the school setting. And those might be interventions you've heard of, like CBITS or Bounce Back. But we've also really thought about what are those additional practices that we would like to see universally implemented to really create a trauma-informed system of care in schools. And that's really what we're doing today. Psychological first aid is a Tier 1 universal approach that allows anyone on school campus to be able to support students should a crisis, disaster, or trauma occur. All right. And there are a number of psychological first aid approaches. This model, called Listen, Protect, Connect, Model, and Teach, was actually developed by the director of our center, Dr. Marlene Wong. And this was developed following the Oklahoma City bombing in 1994. And Dr. Wong was working with schools around that area and worked to develop this model with several other colleagues, along with educators who were on the ground. And I think that's one of the things that I want to say about this particular version of PFA, is that it really is accessible. It is sometimes when people hear the term psychological first aid, they might think that it's something where you have to have all of these advanced clinical competencies to be able to implement it. And that's not the case with this. We know teachers are equipped with a great skill set, and what we try to do is leverage that skill set that you already have, but to apply it to a really difficult situation. So why is PFA important? Well, because we want to restore the learning environment. And in reality, what we want to be doing is providing immediate support where possible in order to help students manage their behaviors, manage their emotional state, and get them as quickly back into the learning environment. And this particular version of PFA is informed by a couple of different theories and practices. It's based on a psychological principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and the intersection of our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. But additionally, I would say it's most influenced by some of the most recent neuroscience literature that's out there about the impact of trauma, but also it is very much tied to what we know about resilience. And what we really want to do is leverage those protective factors that students have to help bring those to students when we're in crisis. And so, like I said, the goals of PFA are pretty simple. We want to establish physical and emotional safety, stabilize emotions and behaviors, and ultimately move them into a place where they feel safe and they are ready to learn again. And so there are really, like I said, 5 different steps within this approach, and again, they are all already in your tool belt. But we'll talk about how we apply them to crises and disasters. And just a little bit more as we put this in perspective. Disasters not only impact us as individuals, but they have a huge effect on our communities. And so we're going to see a lot of disruptions in some of the resources that we actually would typically need to help manage. So there could be disruption in social and communication infrastructures, depleted resources, increased conflicts. And really schools, as we know and as we're seeing, are some of the first institutions to resume operation. And so when that happens in the midst of a large-scale crisis, that's why we want everyone to have these skills and to be able to implement them because of the vital role that schools play in communities. And this is just a quick overview of the fact that it's managing a large-scale crisis or disaster is not a simple approach. It's not simple. And we know there's different phases in the recovery process. Hopefully, at this pre-disaster phase, there are plans already in place should something occur. We have a sense of what we would do. The event occurs, and often there is this community cohesion and resources come in to be able to support the community. Unfortunately, that doesn't always last, and then we see this disillusionment phase. And then we see the working through grief, and Leora, this is her lane of expertise, and there's that phase of it. And then ideally, what I hope you notice is that the reconstruction phase lifts us to a higher level of functioning than we were even at the pre-disaster phase. So the idea is, how do we come together, manage a crisis, and actually transform, not just restore, but transform the community to a place of safety. And of course, it's impossible to talk about psychological first aid without thinking about the context in which we're currently living. And so we know, I think we're calling it the third wave of COVID is going through the country right now. And we are experiencing, we are witnessing violence against communities of color. We are seeing firsthand the issues associated with systemic racism, and all of that is impacting our students, but impacting us as well. And I want us all to take that into context as we step through this approach. And then, of course, we know that it's our communities of color who have been impacted by this in a disproportionate way, both by COVID and, of course, by the racial injustices that we've seen. So if you guys have a moment, are there other community level stressors that you're seeing with the students that you're working with, the families you're working with? What's going on in your communities? Wildfires, exactly, here in California and all along the West Coast. Unemployment, exactly, the economic uncertainty, homelessness. So, and you can see that when these stressors happen already on top of communities that have vulnerabilities, it can be additionally challenging. And then we talk about the impact of disasters at the individual level. And I'm sure many of you have seen this before, but again, the approach is informed by the neuroscience, so I just quickly want to talk it through. Well, we know that there's really three regions of the brain involved in the stress response. The amygdala is like that alarm, that when our brain senses a threat, it sets off a cascade of chemicals that really turns on our fight or flight mode. Our hippocampus is a region of the brain that does two things as part of the stress response. It helps store a memory, but it also is the region of the brain that will help regulate our emotions and bring us back to baseline when we experience safety. And then finally, the prefrontal cortex is the region of the brain that helps us do all of our higher order thinking, our executive functioning, planning, evaluation, following instructions. And when we think about it, this is actually a very useful and effective stress management approach when all of these three regions of the brain work in harmony. But unfortunately, we know that that's not always the case. And when we experience extreme stress, this is actually a little bit more of what the brain functioning looks like. What can happen is that amygdala can fire so powerfully that it actually overrides a lot of our other functioning. And so what we see is the amygdala can knock off aspects of the hippocampus in our ability to regulate our emotions when we're feeling stress, as well as the prefrontal cortex. All of that thinking, logic, evaluation can be compromised momentarily when we're in a state of stress, right? And so another way of thinking about it, and it's not a perfect analogy, but we know that our brain can also be thought of sort of like a muscle. And the more we utilize a particular neural network, the more robust and effective it will get. And unfortunately, if we're not utilizing certain networks, then those go offline and are not as effective. And so I really want to just take a look at this right now, because we are all under stress right now. And so what makes PFA challenging and what makes crisis management challenging is that we as adults, we are also impacted by the same brain state. The effects of stress are the same on us. So one of the reasons I think this version of PFA is so effective is because it leverages skills we already have that are a bit more second nature to us. Whereas if we are in our own fight or flight state, or if our prefrontal cortex is compromised by stress, it's a lot harder to access some of those newer tools as well as more complicated tools. So I think it's really the simplicity of PFA that makes it most effective. And so all of those neural adaptations that I just show, they end up having observable effects on students and our own cognition, our own emotions, behaviors, and even our physical response. So I'm just wondering if you guys want to show in the chat maybe some of the stress reactions that you're noticing in both the students and families that you're working with right now. Yeah, that difficulty communicating. Hopelessness. Yep. Disengagement, memory difficulties, that's the hippocampus, exactly. Tense jaw, I relate to that one, Daisy. Well, thank you for sharing those. Those are all very much in line with very common reactions to stress and trauma. All right, and then finally, the other concept that in research that PFA is based on is what we know about resilience. And resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. It means bouncing back from difficult experiences. And we've all heard people say, why are some kids more resilient than others? Or they might say, well, these two students experienced the exact same thing. One is doing well and one is not doing as well. Why is that? Well, the researchers dug into the concept of resilience, and they really believe that resilience is partly mediated by our protective factors. And we often think about protective factors in two different buckets. Some protective factors are really internal to who we are, and some of it is even maybe biologically based, like our temperament or even certain talents. But there are other protective factors that are more environmental. And so whether we have a relationship with a trusted adult, consistent and predictable routines, having a sense of purpose even, that can be environmentally driven. Having a sense of collective agency can be environmentally driven. And so one of the things that we think about when we're implementing PFA is, what are the protective factors for these students? What do they currently have? And what can I help usher to them during this time of crisis to buffer them from the stress? And of all those protective factors that I've listed, the research shows over and over and over again that a relationship with a trusted adult is the most potent of protective factors. In fact, I love that third bullet here, that it says we can help re-sculpt brain architecture through our relationships. And I just want to quickly show you what I mean by that. If you notice here, this is the reverse of what the prior slide showed, where the amygdala was getting really strong in our prefrontal cortex and hippocampus weren't operating as effectively. Here, through relationships, through trust, we can actually change the functioning of the brain. And one of the things we know is that when we are engaged in a healthy, trusting relationship with a student, that actually releases the chemical oxytocin in their brain. And what we know then is that that oxytocin helps to calm the survival brain, calm that amygdala, and bring these other regions back online. So again, this is a skill you guys already have. You know how to build relationships with your students. What I want you to see here is how effective that trusting relationship is when you're in crisis and a student needs support. That trust is going to go a long way for that student. And so this is exactly what PFA is based on. When a crisis strikes, schools are often the first to respond, and teachers and adults and students' lives are the best ones to help. Trusting relationships are protective. And so we leverage these protective factors once again by listening, understanding what's happening for that person, helping where you can, and connecting to resources. It really is simple. Now, we're talking about doing PFA in a virtual world. And what I want to say today about that is we as a team are learning alongside you. This is new to us. So this is the analogy of building the plane while it's in flight. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is some of the best practices that I've heard from colleagues who are in schools across the country doing great work virtually. And then I really hope, too, this will start a dialogue. Maybe you guys can share in the chat, too, other things you're doing to create connection in a virtual world. And so, like I said, there are just 5 steps to psychological first aid, and they are all already in your wheelhouse. And as we talk through these 5 different steps, I just want you to be thinking about this scenario, and we'll revisit it occasionally to think about how we might apply aspects of PFA to this student. And so here what you're seeing is that there's a student who typically meets all classroom expectations, is suddenly not turning in assignments. And then you were recently made aware that a grandparent was hospitalized with COVID. So let's keep that in mind. All right, so first step is listen. Before we can help in any meaningful way, we need to know what's going on for them. And really, what's challenging about this is that if we're currently experiencing a similar stressor, some of the same circumstances, and we are in that survival mode, our brains want to quickly make assumptions. Our brains process information in a very different way when we're stressed. And so to really slow down and listen is essential. And so, and we use the word listen, but we know it's not just listening, right? It is really hearing what someone says. And also looking for nonverbal cues and observations in their behavior. Now, some of the things we can be trying to interpret, especially when we're doing this virtually, and maybe we have less access to body language. We can't interpret it. Maybe some students aren't using the camera. We can be focused on the volume, the tone, the speed. All of those things give us an indication about whether someone is experiencing stress. The eye contact, virtually, if students do have their cameras on, is there an environmental scan? What are you seeing from them in home, and what is their body language? And then being able to engage with them, and how engaged are they? And so, as I mentioned one of these earlier, there are a number of barriers to listening both when it's in person and virtual. And if we were in a full training, we would do some exercises to really highlight how difficult listening can be. But again, it's particularly difficult when we are under stress. And educators have so many competing demands that educators are filling out a form, talking to a student, really trying to get everything done. But when we need to listen in this way, in the PFA way, we know that our phones need to be set aside. We need to be able to sit with the student and really engage and hear them. And of course, there could be some challenges to doing this virtually. Like I said, when cameras go off, but we want to talk about ways to get around that. And so, strategies to improve virtual listening. Some teachers that I've been working with have really placed an emphasis on being early and inviting students to do the same. And that provides an opportunity for kids to engage with one another, for kids to be engaging with you, and for you to be observing all of those interactions. Really making sure to check in with our students on a daily basis and really trying to see, are there any notable changes in mood and behavior? Also, using the chat feature. It has been very helpful to check in with a student privately, one-on-one. And then, of course, when age appropriate, maybe breaking off into a breakout room with a student to check in. And Dr. Wong, who developed this version of PFA, has partnered with the North American Center for Threat Assessment and Trauma Response and tried to create some prompts for how you might get some information from students during the listening phase when you're trying to really understand what's going on in their experience. And so these are some examples, and I'll be sure to send the link with you. We actually have all of these on index cards to make it very accessible and easy. All right. Step 2 is protect. And for me, there are really 3 pieces of protect. And the first one we've been talking about really since March and since all of our routines were upended is really about the importance of restoring and or establishing new routines. Then we also want to be able to provide reassurance, support, and encouragement where possible. And then we want to determine how we can realistically help in the moment, particularly when there's pressing needs or concerns from the student. And so protecting, doing those 3 things can really help a student bounce back faster. So let's talk about these different ways of protecting. Okay, so we said routine. Maintain structure, establish safety measures and stability. Re-establish those predictable routines, those clear expectations, consistent rules. One of the other things that I think is incredibly important when this work is happening virtually is to really build in some transitions that allow for fun, that allow for exercise, and allow for mindfulness. Because those transitions feel very different than they did during the school day for students. And another thing that we have found is very helpful is the creation of safety signals and safety words. Sometimes when we are having conversations with students, that can be a little bit difficult, or you would like to make sure there's privacy for them. Really making sure you've put in place when a student doesn't feel comfortable, maybe because of things that are going on around them at home and there's something they want to share with you privately, that you guys have signals and words for that. Now, we'll talk about this concept of attunement. And attunement really does 2 things. But what it is designed to do is exactly what that prior brain slide showed, where we talked about the importance of relationships, the importance of connection. Attunement is really the tool that you use to create that connection, to help a student feel seen, heard, and understood, to validate their experiences of what is happening. And another thing in terms of the virtual adaptation is, again, in addition to those safety signals and words that you can build into the routine, also making sure students have earphones or other equipment that help to facilitate privacy when they might want to talk about something that's upsetting to them. And then the third part of Protect is to really figure out, where can I realistically help? And so, like I said, this is what that is. When we create connection, connection calms. Connection calms. All right. So, and the reason I use the music note on here is because, to me, attuning is finding a harmony with the student's emotional world. And so there's two ways to do that. And often one is validation, which is that you're acknowledging a student's feelings, their behaviors, and that their opinions have value. And that might sometimes be challenging because sometimes, for example, a student might say something like, "No one likes me." Well, it's not that we're validating that that's true, but we also don't want to jump in and say, "No, that's not true," because then we're not aligning with their emotional world. So we might say, "It feels like no one likes you," right? I understand that. And so that's a way of connecting with them, but not necessarily when some of these might be thoughts that we don't agree with, but we can still validate their emotional experience of it. That helps them feel seen. And additionally, recognizing even the smallest positive behavior can help them feel seen and appreciated. And I often say that sometimes, the kids who really require the most validation can sometimes be challenging to validate because perhaps they're the ones not meeting the classroom expectations that we want. And so validating is not always easy, but it can be effectively potent, especially when kids are experiencing a lot of stress. And then reflection is a way to, again, just help convey that you understand the internal world of the student that you're working with. Sometimes it could be as simple as summarizing what a student has said, just to ensure for them that they feel heard and understood. And my guess is that probably a lot of you on this call have maybe heard of Bruce Perry, who does incredibly fantastic work in this field. And he says, when seen, heard, and understood, people shift from a state of stress to a state of rest. Now, we used to be able to do that in person with our students. And again, connecting virtually, it isn't a perfect modality for connecting with students. But at the same time, we can leverage the fact that this is a modality that kids feel very comfortable with, that students feel very comfortable with. So we might not have as much, it might not be as accessible to gauge their body language or their facial movements. Some students may elect to turn cameras off. But, we can really use features of our platforms to break off with students and have even these momentary conversations to help them know that you understand where they're currently at. You're meeting them where they are, my apologies. And so this is an example of, we will soon have an online training, and this is one of the pictures from that where we show how teachers can reflect students, even if it's over the use of maybe the chat feature. And so I just want to put out there that even, again, the smallest moment of connection can really help to change that where they're at neurologically and help them feel safe, feel calm, and re-attend to the learning environment. All right, and then the third thing that we want to do, again, we're thinking about calming that survival brain, right? So we've tried to calm the survival brain through having a consistent routine. We've tried to calm the survival brain through connecting with them, letting them know that you understand what's going on within their internal world. And then, if there are immediate concerns that they have, we want to know what they are and be able to support them effectively. So, what is most difficult for you right now? What are you worrying about the most? And, again, are you worried about your safety? Really trying to understand each student's experience of the crisis. And that's where the listening comes in, right? Because each student's experience of the crisis is not going to be the same. And so that is where we're continuing to ask those questions and really understanding where we might be able to support this student. And again, this could be simple things, but again, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if those basic needs are not going to get met, we are not going to be able to support these students because that survival brain is just going to be on. And so in this case, we had to really think about internet access for students and what other basic needs as a result of COVID, the economic results of COVID, and then all of the things we're seeing with racial injustice. What additional supports do students need? And then, again, in that resource we have specific questions that you can be using with students to talk about this. So let's revisit this scenario really quickly. And we have a student in your class who typically meets classroom expectations, but has not been turning in assignments, and you were made aware that a grandparent was hospitalized with COVID. And so now we've talked about two of the tools. We've talked about listening, and then we've talked about protecting. So in those things where we have listen, we have restore routine, we have connect and validate, and then we have identify if there's any immediate needs. That's sort of the checklist that when this comes to you and you're starting to think about going through that checklist now of strategies that you can utilize to engage with this student, whether it's asking questions or, again, just getting a better sense and letting them feel heard. That may be enough. And again, you don't know unless you're asking those questions. And then this is the part where I want to say that we ask our educators to do so much, but the great news is that the third step of Connect is to really be able to reach out to your network, the school's network, your community's network, the student's network. Again, to try to usher in more of those protective factors that we talked about that really facilitate resilience. And so what we mean by connecting is encouraging these interaction and activities with trusted individuals, making new connections, talking or engaging with a mental health professional. Maybe the student needs some additional supports that are beyond the scope of your practice as an educator. And again, reaching out to those resources in the community. And I'm just going to say this again for emphasis. During the protect phase, you will support individuals by identifying the protective factors that will enhance their ability to cope and recover. And I really want to focus on using a culturally responsive approach as we connect. We want to leverage the community and cultural strengths for the students that we're working with and build in protective factors that are meaningful to them. And so are there particular role models that they may be aligned with? What are the unique resources in the community or the culture? Connecting with faith-based institutions, and also leveraging narratives that highlight personal and collective agency in a way that is culturally appropriate. And so, and just this definition of a culturally responsive teaching, which I think is fantastic, it's an approach that empowers the student intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And again, particularly, we want to leverage what empowers a student. Because when we think about it, when we experience a trauma, a crisis, or a disaster, one of the most common reactions is a feeling of helplessness, a feeling that you are out of control. And so what we're trying to do is help students regain a sense of control and agency. And again, you want to not only connect them with individuals that you know can be helpful to them, but you also want, for your own purposes, to maintain that connection with those individuals so you continue to gather information about what's going on with the students and additional supports that they might need. And again, this is really at its most basic. You have these basic needs that you're trying to get them, that you're trying to help get them to meet. And one of the things is if you have a system of care in place, that's essential. And so what you'll have as part of this deck is some examples of school safety and crisis response planning. When all of this is in place at the outset, some of these connecting activities that you'll be doing will be a lot easier and a lot clearer. And so I really want to impress upon everyone that all of that pre-work that we do really pays off in the long term if, unfortunately, we do have to manage a school or community-wide crisis or disaster. And again, these are examples of many of the questions that you can ask when you're trying to connect a student to things that will help. What about your friends, those social networks, family members? Who has been helpful to you in the past? What has worked in the past? All right, so again, we're adding to this PFA toolbox, right? So now we're able to listen, we're able to protect by establishing routine, to engage with them and attune with them, to pitch in where you can, and then more fully connect them to resources, individuals within their community, within their families that can continue to support them. Okay, this for me, I think is probably one of the most potent aspects of PFA. And so 4 is to model. And what we mean by that is modeling calm and optimistic behavior. And so this means maintaining level emotions, trying to stay in the middle of the road, not too high, not too low. Again, that might sound easy, but when we're experiencing the crisis and stress as well, it just is more difficult. And so we'll talk about how we can do that more effectively. And then we want to, as much as possible, express positive and optimistic thoughts for the future. Why? Well, optimism, number one, is a protective factor for students, but also them seeing that calm and optimistic approach will help them to feel more psychologically safe. And then finally, we want to model healthy coping strategies. And again, this modeling piece really aligns with what we know in the neuroscience and this concept that we call emotional contagion, which I think is fascinating. And it's really, what it's trying to explain is that this experience we've all had when we're with someone and their mood in some way is contagious. Often it's, we might encounter someone who's not in a great mood and then we walk away not feeling so great. And then, we certainly have probably all had those experiences where someone's enthusiasm or passion was just contagious. And so we really want to leverage this very common neurological response that happens to our advantage. And so what happens is, from birth, we are wired to really hone in on people's facial expressions, nonverbal expressions. And what happens is we unconsciously mimic them. And then through the mimicking process, we actually then experience that same emotion. And so when we are talking about showing up with a calm and optimistic demeanor, it's because we want that to be contagious to our students. Another example that I like to use when I talk about emotional contagion is experience that I have flying, because I don't love flying. And perhaps if any of you are like me, if you're on a plane and suddenly it hits turbulence, I tend to immediately look right at the flight attendant. And if he or she still has that calm demeanor, it goes a long way towards reassuring me and helping restore my calm. And so I like this analogy, because for a lot of students who are uncertain during these very unpredictable times, they're looking to you like that flight attendant, like me on a plane in turbulence, looking, is it going to be okay? And your own optimistic, calm demeanor can on its own settle them through this emotional contagion phenomenon. And then I don't think it's ever been more important to do two things: to model healthy coping strategies, but we can't really model healthy coping strategies unless we're using them on our own. And so self-care has been almost a cliched word for quite some time, but it has never been more important, more essential. I've sort of think of it as building my psychological immunity. Right now with COVID, we all talk about physical immunity, but what about our psychological immunity to stress? So again, if we're utilizing healthy coping strategies, then we can be modeling them for our students. And again, that aligns with that protect, step 2, protect. When we talk about routine, have we built this in to our routine? Do we start the day with mindfulness? When we come back from breaks, do we settle ourselves? Again, it's incredibly important for the students to learn these strategies, but it is incredibly important for you all to be utilizing them, because really we can't do any of this work. We can't even engage into step 1, listen, unless we're able to find a place of calm in ourselves. And so I know it's hard to do. I know everyone's got so much on their plates, but the more we're practicing these strategies, the more we're able to utilize them when we really, really need them. And so again, I won't belabor this too much, but as we're adding to that tool belt, now we're thinking about other things that we can be doing with the student to help whatever their experience of their stress and what's going on at home. And so are we able to show them some coping? Are we modeling calm and optimism? And are we doing those other 3 steps that we previously discussed? All right, and then finally, the last step is to teach. And we're going to teach a couple of things. And of course, we have to do this in a way that's developmentally appropriate, but we want to teach and help them understand that many of the experiences that they're feeling, whether it's emotional, that they are completely normal in the scope of what's happening in their community or what's happening nationally. And then there is nothing more empowering than helping a student problem solve for themselves. So again, that healing factor of empowerment. We want to bring that into the teaching process. And so what are we normalizing? What we're normalizing are all of those common reactions to stress. And for those of you who have had a full Trauma 101 before, you guys know what these are, right? Changes, physical changes. These are the unexplainable stomach aches, headaches, difficulty sleeping. When we know that's going on for a student, we can say, did you know that's quite typical given what's going on? Emotional changes. Kids might be feeling fine one day, depressed the next, anxious the next, and letting them know that those are perfectly natural in the context of what's going on. Similarly, and I think that this was put into the chat, a lot of cognitive changes. Difficulty memorizing, difficulty focusing, difficulty with problem solving. Again, letting students know. And then often there are changes in spiritual beliefs. And that is a very common response to feeling helpless in the world. And again, as much as possible for our students who do have spiritual or religious beliefs, really aligning them and linking them with faith-based communities to support that. And so some of the problem solving, after we've been able to normalize, some of the problem solving is really going to be about the basics. You know, what are you doing to get to work or school every day? What's challenging about it? How do we overcome that challenge? How do we stay at school every day and stay engaged? What can we be doing to facilitate that? And how to manage just all of our everyday tasks. This can feel very overwhelming in helping students make a plan. And again, as much as they are the leader in that plan making, it's going to build that mastery and that empowerment. So really being able to sit with the students and help them put that plan together is the key to step 5. So, and again, we will give you access to all of these notes. So there are these notes and these cards, and so that you can have some of these prompts available to you. When you're finding that you don't quite know what to say or what to do next, we hope that these are useful resources to you. And then PFA really never ends. So this is a misnomer, but what you want to say is that you know that there are people who care about you and who want to help, and that you are consistently available to them. It is that consistency piece that really helps create that sense of psychological safety and calm. And then ending it with, I look forward to when we all return to school and taking care of you and your family. And so again, I'm just going to leave us with a few minutes to think about this scenario and the fact that when we encounter this with kids, we often have that feeling of, I don't know what to say. I don't want to make it worse. If I bring it up, will it re-traumatize the student? And so I hope what PFA can show is that, number one, you don't need to do anything but utilize skills that are already in your tool belt, but use it with this intention. Now that you have the background about the brain science and protective factors, you can use all of those skills with even more intention and feel less apprehensive about engaging students around some of these very stressful topics. And so I just want to take a few minutes. If you want to type it into the chat, you can. But really, it's really hard to utilize a new practice. And again, this wasn't a full training by any means. This is just a very cursory overview for you to understand the components of PFA. But how would you see yourself using it? Are there additional supports that you would need from leadership or administrators to be able to implement it? What might make using PFA challenging? And could you or have you or would you be able to integrate PFLPC into your Safe School plan? So thinking about that. And then finally, as we're talking about all of these different systems and how do these things align, and what I really want to stress is that PFA really falls into this universal whole school trauma programming domain. This is a figure of the key components of a trauma responsive school that was developed by our center. And any practice that utilizes or leverages these core concepts of building safety, a sense of trust, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, and cultural humility. We believe PFA-LPC aligns with all of those principles and therefore is an important universal practice for all educators to have. And so I'll stop there, and I know we wanted to set aside some time for questions.
Pamela, that was the most amazing amount of rich content in such like speed. I mean, I feel like I don't have words for how much. I actually, we're going to do something in honor of what you taught us. We're going to do something a little creative, and Sierra has a question in the Q&A box that you might be able to speak to while we do something creative. Okay. So everyone stick with me for a second. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Pamela, I'm going to take the screen share away from you.
Okay. And is it Sierra's question that I'm answering?
Yep, that would be great.
So, great. Okay, so Sierra asked, what are the similarities and differences between mental health first aid and psychological first aid? And that's a great question. We think of psychological first aid as something, I think, a little bit simpler, more streamlined, that you can kind of pick up and utilize. And again, our effort was to leverage skills educators already have, whereas mental health first aid is a fantastic practice. It goes into more depth, and I do think it requires a bit more knowledge acquisition to be able to implement it. I think they both have their pros and cons. I find the pros of PFA-LPC being simple and accessible, something that's incredibly useful, again, because the point I made that typically when we're in the middle of a crisis, it's not just the student who's under stress and in survival mode. We are too. And so I think the simpler the practice, the more effective, but mental health first aid is incredibly rich. I know the entire state of California trains in it, and it's also a fantastic intervention.
Yeah, and Ken is bringing up, and thank you for everyone's patience. We have an activity that we're going to bring up, so we're going to do that in a second. But Ken's also bringing up an important connection that MHFA and YMHFA is focusing on identifying young people or adults who are grappling with mental health symptomology or signals of distress, but not always related to crisis or recovery. So it's a cousin, but not always the same thing. I'm gonna ask you, Pamela, to hold on to Brad's question and invite everyone. We're actually going to, because Pamela had so much, because we have some time to practice, want to engage in a virtual adaptation of a pedagogical tool. So if we were in person, we'd have good old sticky notes, remember those, and we would put on the board our takeaways or ideas, and we're not in person. So if any of you, this is your first time doing Jamboard, welcome. If it's your multiple time doing Jamboard, also welcome. So you should have in the chat box the link to the Jamboard, and you can see everyone here. What you will notice is on the left-hand side, you'll see these sticky notes, and you can actually click on this icon, the sticky note, and write and post your sticky note of one idea that you heard that you want to explore. And then you can come up here and click the next Jamboard and offer one resource that you're walking away with. So a tool or a connection, and you can move them. So you can move them around. You could even add an image if you wanted. You could add your own text. So I'm going to invite you, exactly, just like someone just did, to put one idea that you heard that you wanted to explore. So phases of disaster. So Pamela, that the model that you introed with is something that folks really want to explore. So let's
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I
people
mean,
are adding more. Yeah.
oh, okay, great. So the phases of disaster, again, that comes from FEMA. And again, it really, I think, helps us navigate. The reason I bring it into this is to be able to say, where are we at within the phases? Now, I think what's a little bit limiting about that model is the kind of crisis and disaster we're currently experiencing, I don't necessarily think follows that exact trajectory. And that's because we are consistently in it. And it's going through its own phases. And so trauma and stress is being revivified, potentially with what's happening on the news, second waves, having to go back into more stringent lockdowns. So I present it, I think it probably aligns with, I hate to say, a more traditional disaster like a fire or an earthquake. But I think what we're experiencing right now is a really unique kind of disaster. So I hope that as it applies to now, I want to link it to now. But these are what FEMA has found as the key phases.
Great. Okay. So while live sticky noting, so while this is happening, so there's a lot of folks who want to explore the difference between psychological first aid and mental health first aid. So that might be an extension for next week or for another time. Just wanted to name this. I'm going to help you all and drag your Post-its. We also, there's some folks who are thinking, how do we talk about virtual PFA training for our staff? So that's a question that's coming up. Not necessarily for you to address right now, Pamela. I'm just reading them out for folks who are on audio.
Oh, okay.
And we've also got folks saying we want to have a training for teachers to get them certified for psychological first aid. And I would just add anyone who's asking teachers to get psychological first aid training that you actually first ensure that school site leadership and district administration are getting trained so that they're providing psychological first aid first for your educators and then educators for students. It can actually cause a lot of stress for educators to get trained in something they themselves are not receiving. So just wanted to
Leora, you are on the same soapbox as me. Yeah. That is so important. There needs to be that alignment always. Yep.
This is so great. So neurological impacts of relationship. I'm going to move to one resource that folks are walking away with. So how do we apply psychological first aid to us, educators and providers? So again, for folks, you're watching my mouse, you can just click on the sticky note, and then you can have a sticky note added. And then you've got folks who are interested in ways that teachers can connect to students in a virtual world and having safety and signals and words. So I will just offer you that this is Jamboard is a way that many educators and providers actually interact virtually because it's anonymous. So there is a high degree of safety, especially for students, and you can actually have a private chat then for students to ask for support. So it's a way in which a virtual world we can get creative, and there's many. This is the most simple way to use Jamboard. There's many other tools. Let's get a couple more, and then we're going to go back to questions. Oh my goodness. Okay, great. So just remember, there's ideas that you heard that you want to explore, and then also one resource that you're walking away with. Yeah. Okay, so Pamela, we're hearing that psychological first aid is much simpler to understand and apply. And okay, this is a question that I am actually going to lob your way. How do you scale this practice to all school staff so we respond to student behavior in an equitable, trauma-informed, and consistent way?
How do we scale this?
Yeah.
Well,
just
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I recommend to schools and districts as they reach out to us about this practice is that you're immediately building in sustainability in terms of a train-the-trainer approach, in terms of bringing into your school or district people who have mastery over the content and then can continue to help individuals implement that. So I think ideally, yes, you would like to have everyone trained in it, but beyond that, having internal mastery within your organization to be able to continue training, continue consultation, and continue coaching. That consultation and coaching is probably, I think, one of the most important implementation factors and sustainability factors.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, so we're seeing, oh, I just did a thing that you shouldn't do, which is draw. Don't do that. I will figure out how to, oh, I know how to undo that. So you'll see, everyone, that that you can actually drag and you can star. And so we're kind of doing a live experience, embodied experience of virtual training. And just as a cue, you can also code your colors, right? You can have students, I often have educators who I'll ask them if they're feeling really dysregulated and unsupported and potentially in harm of themselves. I'll ask them to put a specific sticky note in one color versus another. So there's ways to do it. I'm just gonna look for a little bit more questions. These are great. And we're gonna stop this share right now. You can continue to do it, but I do wanna get to Brad and Ken's questions, and then we'll transition back to you, sharing your screen to close.
Okay.
So Brad's got a question on CPS, and then also what certification looks like.
Yes, I'm not as expert in collaborative problem solving, but I can tell you that that very much aligns with, we have another intervention that you guys will be learning about next time, which is our trauma-informed skills for educators. And we have a number of resources that do exactly this. This collaborative problem solving approach could absolutely be woven into that step 5. And in fact, I would encourage you to utilize it because it's a robust version of what I was saying in terms of the problem solving and scaffolding and mastery. So absolutely, and again, that's why this approach is really designed for you to weave in those skills that you have. And then Ken, I can tell you more about PFA certification. We do training through our center, and we also have a train the trainer approach. So we can certify both as a PFA implementer, but also down the road as a PFA trainer, should that be something that you're interested in.
Yeah, and on a separate project, Pamela and I were part of the NCTSN network, and so there's also interest in thinking about PFA applied in long-term crisis recovery, not just in acute. So we might be able to do something there. Okay, yeah. Great. I'm going to invite you, Pamela, to reshare your screen. I'm watching the sticky notes come in, and this is they're great. But we are going to move into closing. So if you might move it forward. Oh, okay. Do you want to close?
I just wanted to acknowledge my colleagues. That's Dr. Marlene Wong, who is one of the original developers of PFA, and my colleague Vivian Villaverde. We are really the primary trainers in PFA.
Yep, and I just want to give credence. Many of you know Dr. Marlene Wong, and she is such an on this earth ancestor in the work of school mental health and in crisis recovery. So thank you to Dr. Wong, and Vivian, I think and you, Pamela, will be teaching the next session. Is that correct? Yeah, great. Okay, would you mind moving forward? Okay. So let's talk about moving forward, speaking of which. So please, 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 just as many of you have, continue to join these sessions, but we really encourage you to join them as teams as much as possible so that you can meet and gather afterwards and think about what resonated, what needs more inquiry, and how might TA best support your next steps. What is the word I'm thinking of? On the deck, you'll have the link to the guideposts that Susan and her team wrote, and that will help orient you to ISF, Interconnected Systems Framework, if you're not yet. And then, of course, Pamela and her colleagues are huge leaders nationwide and worldwide in trauma-informed schools, everything. And so you can check out all their resources, short video clips. Who doesn't love 2-minute video clips on strategies and practices at the Treatment and Services Adaptation Center? And I'm going to move us forward, or you will. Okay, great. So up next, you heard us reference up next. So please join us back on the 17th. I know it might seem really far away to think about the 17th right now, but it will happen. The 17th will happen, and join Pamela and her colleague Vivian to get more skills around adaptations for trauma-informed skills for educators. And then, of course, join us for the rest. You can get all of the resources and the recordings from the link up on the screen, bit.ly-ISF 2021. Okay, and a couple other learning opportunities. We, as a national MHTTC, we have a fantastic weekly series led by our colleagues at the Alaska Native and American Indian MHTTC. If any of you identify or support students or clients who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native in tribal schools reopening amongst COVID-19, so want to address that. If you're in the Pacific Southwest, join us on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific time for Wellness Wednesdays. Our colleague Oriana Iles is going to be leading us through boundary work. How can you engage in psychological first aid without having a deep sense of boundary and healthy boundaries? So join us for that. And then our center in December is starting a 3-part series on trauma-informed suicide prevention, but from the district leadership stance. So district, county, state systems. So join us for that. Last but not least, friends and colleagues near and wide, please join us next week for our network, Grief Sensitive Virtual Learning Institute, GSVLI, because you all need more acronyms in your life. This is a time, and I'm going to take a moment. We just talked about psychological first aid, and we talked about crises, and we talked about trauma, and the undercurrent is really inviting us as educators and school mental health providers and all the roles we hold to become more grief attuned to support those around us and ourselves. And so next week, Thursday, Friday, completely no cost. There's a school mental health, clinical, and general tracks. You can join us for some or all. Everything will be recorded and uploaded. But please do RSVP by this Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, so that you get all the Zoom links for the sessions. This will go out in your follow-up email. I'm actually going to put it in the chat box right now so that you've got the link. You've got the link for November. Watch me do it as I'm speaking. This is live linkaging happening. So please join us for November for the Grief Sensitivity Virtual Learning Institute. That will deeply, deeply help all of us. And I will just say one other note about that, which is that we really held it next week, right before holiday season, winter season, and a time when there has just been so much collective grief. So Julie, I will say that for any event that's coming just from the Pacific Southwest, the Pacific Island time zones are considered. If it's national, we have to find a medium with all the other time zones that we support, including Puerto Rico. So there might be some ebb and flow. Okay, last but not least, before we get to some evaluation and close, there are 2 links up for the National MHTTC Network, one for COVID-19, responding to grief, loss, and bereavement. We're putting that link up specifically for those of you who are interested in virtual adaptations of psychological first aid. And then, of course, our national hub for all COVID-19 school mental health resources. So that's all of our MHTTCs together. I am going to invite you, in between whatever you are doing now and what you are doing next, just to take one moment of either body movement or shakeout, one moment where you might even think about who models loving listening for you, who listens to you in a way that makes you feel seen and you feel heard, and that your psychological first aid is tended to. And just to appreciate that person. We're actually getting folks putting in their examples in the chat box. I love that so much. Yes. Yes, I will name my dear friend's 6-year-old who listens to me in sometimes more ways than I would even want. So a lot of you are modeling, and just as Pamela said, we know how to do this work. Sometimes it feels overwhelming, but we've experienced it in our best times. And so just want to offer you a lot of courage and wisdom in your school mental health championship, an invitation to return to us on the 17th. A huge thank you to Pamela, Vona, and the USC team. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And our colleagues at the Northwest MHTTC. Please take care of yourselves in wellness and in health, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.